In the past, Britain's highways were lined with machines that everyone relied on but no one liked. They weren't constructed to impress, they weren't swift, and they weren't flashy. Hidden amid them, however, was a van so brutally plain and honest that it silently became the foundation of an entire working nation. It wasn't intended for the Morris J4 to be exceptional. In fact, a lot of people would contend that it was out of date from the start. Nevertheless, it persisted for more than 20 years. Because there were secrets hidden under its simple metal exterior that most people were unaware of, mysteries that explain how this little van became one of Britain's most lasting workhorses. You must return to post-war Britain in order to comprehend the Morris J4. The nation was rebuilding its spirit as well as its infrastructure. Industries needed dependable transport more than ever. Small enterprises were springing up everywhere, and tradespeople were going back to work. Luxurious living was not appropriate at this time. It was an era of affordability, durability, and practicality. There was pressure on British automakers to provide cars that could sustain the economy without using scarce resources. When the Morris J4 debuted in 1960, it entered a market where functionality was more important than style. It was not intended to win people over when it was built by the British Motor Corporation's Morris division. It was intended to transport livelihoods, products, and tools. In that regard, it was nearly instantly successful. Cargo space was maximized by its boxy design. Because of its straightforward design, it was simpler to fix. And from the start, its goal was obvious. Beneath its simplicity, however, lay one of the Morris J4's most unexpected secrets. The J4 stuck to an earlier, nearly unyielding design philosophy when many vans of the time were changing with more contemporary layouts. The driver was positioned above and somewhat ahead of the engine thanks to its forward control configuration. Because of its exceptional space efficiency, it could accommodate more goods without growing larger overall. This was a useful benefit for craftsmen negotiating congested British streets. However, there were sacrifices in this design that few people discussed in public. The driving experience was anything but sophisticated. When the vehicle was completely loaded, the engine, often referred to as underpowered, struggled. By today's standards, safety was not a top focus, comfort was low, and noise levels were excessive. Drivers had virtually little protection since they sat at the front. The Morris J4 seemed to be more of an endurance vehicle than a comfortable one in many respects. However, that was exactly what made it strong. The Morris J4's mechanical integrity, rather than its engineering prowess, was its true secret. It made use of tried-and-true parts that were previously known for their dependability. The engines were straightforward and simple to maintain. The suspension was robust enough to withstand abrasive use. Most significantly, it could be fixed practically anywhere, frequently with simple equipment. This was crucial for small business owners who couldn't afford downtime. Nevertheless, the J4 had a secret flaw that would plague it for the rest of its existence. As newer vans with higher performance, increased safety, and more contemporary designs hit the market, it was already becoming out of date. Rivals started selling cars that were both more efficient and more comfortable. In contrast, the Morris J4 began to feel like a thing of the past. However, loyalty more than made up for its lack of originality. The Morris J4 became a common sight throughout Britain. Early in the morning, it brought bread to nearby stores. It carried tools for builders, plumbers, and electricians. It moved cargo over country roads and via small city streets. It was more than simply a car for a lot of families. It was a component of their way of life. In a time of uncertainty, it stood for steadiness. This has an emotional reality that is frequently overlooked. Automobiles such as the Morris J4 were not adored in the conventional sense. They were revered. They were trusted. And a more profound form of relationship developed over time as a result of that quiet dependability. The J4's appearance did not inspire admiration. They recalled it because of what it accomplished. It had an equally important effect on British industry. The J4 offered a reliable and reasonably priced solution at a period when small enterprises were the foundation of the economy. It made it possible for people to begin and maintain their trades. When resources were scarce, it maintained the flow of goods. In many respects, it contributed to Britain's economic recovery in a minor but significant way. The J4 was a warning as well as a success for the British Motor Corporation. It demonstrated that there was still a market for straightforward, useful cars by selling steadily for years. However, it also brought attention to the dangers of lagging behind in terms of innovation. The J4's outdated design proved more difficult to defend as the automotive industry changed. Its continuous existence on the road long after it ought to have been replaced was one of the most significant moments in its history, rather than a single spectacular incident. The Morris J4 was already out of date by the 1970s. Nevertheless, it continued to carry loads, perform its duties, and be used on a regular basis. Its distinctive legacy was its silent perseverance, but as usual, time passed. The Morris J4's demise wasn't abrupt. It was slow, almost unavoidable. Better fuel efficiency was provided by newer vans, particularly at a time when fuel worries and economic demands were growing more pressing. Safety rules were changing. The expectations of customers were evolving. Additionally, the J4's outdated design made it impossible for it to keep up. Rust had a role as well. The J4 had poor corrosion protection, just like many cars of its time. Many of these trucks eventually vanished due to wear and tear from years of labor and weather exposure. All that was left were recollections and a few surviving artifacts that depicted a previous era. Production eventually stopped in 1981. The Morris J4 gently left the stage after more than 20 years. No grand farewell was placed. No commemoration of its accomplishments. It just vanished, to be replaced by more contemporary substitutes. However, the story didn't stop there. Today, people remember the Morris J4 for what it stood for more than what it lacked. It serves as a remembrance of a time when automobiles were designed with a specific function. When dependability was more important than skill. When a van was evaluated based on how well it served the people who relied on it rather than how it looked. That kind of legacy has a really human quality. The Morris J4 didn't try to attract attention. It didn't strive to be better than it was. Day after day, year after year, it just carried out its duties. And in doing so, it became a part of innumerable lives in ways that are hard to quantify. The sound of its engine, the feel of its controls, and even its flaws evoke nostalgia in those who remember it. It brings back memories of long days, early mornings, and the peaceful fulfillment of honest labor. It's not the type of memory that demands attention. It's the kind that silently lingers with you over time. And that might be the most crucial secret of all. It was never intended for the Morris J4 to be exceptional. However, it became just that in its own subtle way. Consider subscribing if you like discovering tales like these that delve deeper and examine the genuine heritage of vintage cars. Not for more cacophony, but for more times like this, when the silent voice of history speaks.